So, if we can have our first object, please. Art shows, many of you are repeat offenders. So the truth is that you see the programs repeatedly and you do understand that the formula is almost always the same. We're talking about history, so we can't vary history. Sometimes we do specific themes on a particular accessory or a kind of piece of clothing, but we do work within the rules of chronology. So we usually start with something from the early Edwardian period, and we'll come through to around 2000. So that's our formula today for those of you who are newcomers to our programs. This dress is about 1905, maybe as early as 4 and as late as 1907 or 8, but 5 or 6 is probably the more precise dating. When Kathy was talking to you about Ivan and dating photographs, I am very good with photographs if there are women in them, because women's clothing dates more precisely and shaped and drawn. Parker's going to come along soon probably, and he'll help us identify photographs that have men in them. He's better with men stuff than I am. This dress is plain white cotton muslin with a floral bouquet of roses printed randomly, as you can see. It is a dress I bought from, I think the man's name was Bright. I think it was Mr. Bright. I've got it written down somewhere. He had taken the dress to the Surrey Museum in Cloverdale. He wanted to donate it, but they felt they couldn't use it because it had nothing to do with local history. It was out of his wife's family. His wife had died, so he didn't know too much specific about the history of the garment. She was married, the family was originally from Ontario, I believe. So the dress is likely Canadian, but central Canadian. You've got to remember that Ontario is in the center of the country. We tend to think it's the east, but it isn't, It isn't actually. That's news from the maritime. So. Anyway, when the museum turned him down, he was quite disappointed, and he asked them what to do. So they said, "Well, talk to me, and maybe I would buy it from him." So I went to see him. There was actually quite a bad rip in the skirt, which we repaired. So I couldn't even find it the other day, but it was a rip about that long, if I remember correctly. I went to see him, and he was cagey. He was an old guy, Lee 70. I was only about 50 at the time, so he was an old guy. Anyway, and he was being cagey with me because he figured, oh, this guy's going to try and rip me off. So he said how much. You shouldn't have that happen. Somebody wants to sell something, they should name the price. You can't be buyer and seller. But okay. So anyway, he said how much, and I said, well, it's damaged. The best I'm sorry, the best I can offer is $100. And he looked at me, and he said, give me 75. And that's my best thought about this dress, because he was so pleased that I didn't try and offer him $20 for it, or whatever, which is what he half expected I was going to do. So the lesson is be straight with people, and it pays off. I saved $25. Or cheap liquor. The dress is really pretty. I was truly pleased to get it. For this period, the principal angle of perception, the way you want to look at this dress to its best advantage is from the side. They're trying to create the impression of the S-shaped curve. This is the early Edwardian period. The hat is worn tilted slightly forward, cantilevered out over the forehead. So that's the beginning of your S shape. It curves up over the back of the head, where the hair should be drawn in tightly to the nape of the neck. It will pass through the high dog collar or stock collar, if you prefer. Then it curves over the pouter pigeon chest, through the smallest of the corseted waist, over the curve of the bustle pad, and then it splays out towards the bottom. And you can see that the skirt is actually made to curve outward. Everything is supposed to be curving. This is womanly. This is also, at their time, they think of this as natural and organic. Well, in terms of straight lines do not, well, they exist in nature because we perceive them, but actually most things in nature are relaxed and fluid. So that's what they're looking at with this. To get the skirt to expand, it's got all these little tiny pin tucks in through there, then they're released, and then you have the graduated flaps at the bottom as well. If you have seen the film of the street scenes in Vancouver in 2007, the photographer put a motion camera on the front of a streetcar at the time and went north on Granville Street and then east on Hastings Street. And there are women in 1907, which is conceivably the year of this date of this dress, and the women gently run across the street in front of the camera, and the skirts flutter. It's absolutely wonderful. One of the reasons that we justify doing live fashion shows with historic garments is that they're meant to be seen in motion, and that's how it works. Underneath this, she would wear a shift, a corset, a bustle pad, a bust improver, bloomers, a camisole, and 3 petticoats. So then there's the stockings and the garters as well, or whatever else we use to keep the garters up. The shoes that we use for the earliest outfits are Hycroft, so please don't learn too much from the shoes. We get them as close to the original formula as we can. The garment is fragile and delicate. That's the way it's meant to be, because it's meant to imply that she is in a privileged position. It's not a garment for labor. She sits in this. It is about being an ornamental object. There is nothing wrong with being ornamental. We all know how wonderful it is to be ornamental. Unless it's the only thing you're thinking about. And then there should be some revision there. Everybody likes to feel they're looking their best, regardless. So you pick a color, you pick fabrics or whatever that you think complements you, and that's part of this business here. Beauty by impairment. The more handicapped you are by your clothing, the greater your status and your appeal. Okay, thank you very much. So everyone will come as closely to it as they can so that you can get a good view. But please try to resist the temptation to touch the dresses. This dress is as I got it. In other words, we've never washed it. All I've done to it is repair the rip in it. But we want to keep these things as fresh as possible, because many of them cannot be cleaned. So please understand that. The only consistent complaint we get about our fashion shows is that people at the back can't see. We are aware of that. We've been trying to figure out how to rearrange the seating here. We have people here now, which we haven't done in the past. We did think about trying to have the stage in the middle of the room, but we were, because of fire regulations and whatnot, it was going to cut down the capacity quite a bit. And we need to pay our bills, so we have to be a little bit mercenary, I'm afraid. So if anybody can come up with a better idea, if you can't, get here earlier, and then you get the front row. So, in other words, that's all about the aisles. So the women will try and go up and down the aisles and come across the back there, perhaps, so that you can get a better look. Certainly don't hesitate to stand if you think that it gives you a better vantage point. We have the next outfit, please. Now, these early outfits, they are youthful because they're so slim and so on. But the truth is they're meant to look fairly mature. And by that I mean they are covering the body up rather well. As one ages, one worries about the texture of the skin going, double chin, there's no point going through the whole litany. But the first dress shows you the high stock or dog collar. That covers you up. That's about modesty, but it's also about preserving the illusion of perfection that much longer. The idea is to illustrate a mature woman with a very slender figure, admittedly, but she is supposed to be mature because the men of importance of the period were 35 to 45 years of age. They were the men who were in a financial position through work or business or what have you. Men in a position to afford to support a wife and family in a society where only the male family member would work outside the home. So his female counterpart is going to be a person of that same age category, more or less, and it will stay that way until the First World War. Now, a lot of you are repeat people in our audiences, so you've heard the spiel too many times, but we also have to consider the people who are here for the first time. So if I repeat myself, I apologize, but it's the formula we have to do it. Sheila's wearing a dress here, you can hardly tell, but it is pink. A pink cotton machine embroidered dress from about somewhere between 1909 and 1911. What's happening now is they're trying to simplify the garment. It's a bit hard to see because it is still pretty fussy. But in actual fact, by this time, instead of 3 petticoats, she might have reduced it to 2. And eventually it's going to be 1. Scandalous, of course. However, you still need the upholstery of layering and whatnot, partly to increase the size of the skirt, making the waistline appear to be smaller. It's hard to imagine that Sheila is very, very big woman. But the truth is, her natural waistline, of course, is tiny, but it looks to be even smaller because the skirt has 2 petticoats in it. It's cut to graduate, as the first outfit was, and also we have those frills over the shoulders, making her shoulders look broader. All about illusion, the optical illusion. The waistline could be anywhere from there to there. In 1907, the year of that dress, conceivably, they reintroduced an empire waistline. So they raised the waistline, and sometimes they sort of ease it in by making it broad, so that you've got a waistline at the natural waist, but there's another one here, essentially. This is an attempt to revive the styles that were popular from the 1790s through to about 1820, the Empire period. So this is an Empire revival waistline, which is sort of 1780s, 90s, and throughout the whole Jane Austen period until the end of this month. We have 2 Regency dresses on display out at UBC. Special Collections Division of the UBC Library was fortunate last year in that they attained some Jane Austen first editions, which is a bit sort of trembly and exciting for me. I'm a big fan of Jane Austen. Anyway, so we've got 2 dresses on display, one from about 1800, the other one from about 1810, and then there are some other accessories as well. But it's a great excitement for the library, obviously, to have those things. And they're there until the 28th, I think it is. Does anyone here know? I know we have to take it out just at the end of the month.
What's the question?
When does that display end?
I think it's February 28th.
February the 28th.
Yeah.
So.
They may extend it because of the snow. I think it shut down almost for a while.
Oh,
but I don't know.
right.
But at the moment it's 28th.
But it's a small display. It's in the UBC Library, in the old building, on the lower level of Main
Yeah,
Mall, is it?
in something library near the North Parkade.
Yeah, it's kind of kick corner from the Student Union building.
Yeah.
But ask around if you can't find it.
Just Google
Special
Edwardian
collection.
or something special.
Special collections UBC Library. But because it is a thrill to see these books, and the truth is they're going to go back into the stacks, and you'll be able to see them by appointment, but only by appointment. So if you're a Jane Austen fan or a BBC fan, remember Jane Austen made BBC famous.
And I think SMOC has its Regency prints and your accessories, which I thought were very interesting.
Yeah, there are some fashion plates there from 1804 and things like that. So, which also brings me to the point, if anybody is specifically interested in that sort of thing, we've got stuff in storage. I can show you things like that. Or if you're content sometimes to have a program which is not a fashion show, we can do a program just on Regency clothes, both men and women's, but it would have to be a display with slides. So just to let you know that that would have to be the compromise. We can show earlier things, but we can't show them on someone. In the 1780s, there was a movement towards sort of a simplification of dress. Marie Antoinette, of course, is famous for her ostentatious display, but even she sort of picked up on this new trend. They were trying to sort of get back to nature. There was a whole concentration on natural costume, natural living. English gardens started to become hugely popular, and they are gardens which are much more sort of random, the way they're laid out. French and continental gardens tended to be more formalized, with straight avenues with very organized plantings of trees and shrubbery and whatnot. The English ones tended to be more, as you say, random. And this was catching on with people. It was a nice change. It was like rap as opposed to opera. Sometimes change is appetizing just because it's something new. When that happened, women's clothing tended to move towards cotton instead of silk. Cotton. They wanted a slightly high waistline with a full lip skirt, as opposed to pannier in the 18th century, which were all about width. Now it was about height, and this is what they're imitating. And if you look at some of the paintings of Reynolds and Gainsborough, the women have massive amounts of natural hair, not white wigs, as earlier in the 18th century, and they wear enormous hats. And that's why these big hats that you've seen in My Fair Lady and all those big wonderful Hollywood movies and the BBC ones, those big hats of the period just before the First World War, sort of 1909 to about 1913, they're imitating the style of hats that was popular in the 1780s and early 90s. It bounces like a ball. Fashion just repeats itself over and over and over again. And it's always about doing old things in new ways. So that's what you see going on here. The hat was given to me by Maureen Timtu, if any of you know Maureen. Maureen is on the board, or was on the board of directors at the Rhodey House Museum in the West End. We are doing 150 years of Canadian fashion on July the 1st at Rhodey House, hopefully in the grounds. We don't know how to keep the pour out. So actually, what would be wonderful, if anybody wants to come up with several thousands of dollars to sponsor the event, we would like to make it free. But we can't because we'll have expenses. But we want to have a big garden party there. We're going to show 150 years of Canadian clothing. Harper and a few other volunteers are going to make the repros for the 19th century clothes. We've already got one, that's good done. Excuse me. And we'll be showing men's things as well. So it'll be July the 1st, and it'll be in, well, I think it's July the 1st is a holiday, on the day that we can do it. And it'll be in the grounds, and it'll be tea and cupcakes or something like that, I hope. So come if you can. Thank you very much, Sheila. It is called shameless self-promotion. Okay. There we go. Okay. Now, I told you it was all going to be sentimental stuff. Debbie's wearing an outfit here which I think should be about 1914, 1915. And it is the last stage of the hobble style. Now, the dress that Sheila is wearing is clear of the ground. And that was a real adventure at the time. And it might be a little bit too short for her, actually, because Sheila is quite tall. But there are photographs of especially very young women, Sheila's still in high school, who would have worn something like this because they were a bit braver than their mothers or their older sisters or what have you. But the truth is that it was a coming thing. Women still couldn't vote. The suffragist movement was very adamant about trying to change the laws and social attitudes, and a short skirt was about efficiency. It was about modernity. But at the same time, that efficiency sort of went too far. By the middle part of 1912, the skirts had become more and more abbreviated to the point where they were too abbreviated, and they got really narrow at the bottom. So here you can see with this dress, the skirt is actually broader through the hips than it is at the bottom. See, I told you could stand up. Either that or you're bored and you have to stimulate your legs. Anyway, the dress is, as far as I'm concerned, it's the beginning part of this First World War. First War starts in 1914, goes to 1918. One of the things that you will find in wartime economy is you're trying to save fabric and you are encouraged to recycle. The dress looks a bit like upholstery fabric. The coat is a separate piece. The coat has a label in it from an American department store. Wanamaker's, I think it is, but I'm not sure at the moment. But the dress, actually, let's just take the coat off so you can see the dress itself. So, yeah, we're good. The dress I bought at a vintage clothing sort of antique shop in Gastown, probably in the early 70s, and I bought it because it was one of the ugliest dresses I'd ever seen in my life. We joke about it being the dress that the birds and the mice made for Cinderella. And if you remember the Gospel according to Walt Disney, they used bits and pieces that they found in a trunk in the attic. Well, this is in fact made out of recycled fabrics. The dress itself, the blue and the pink here, is made out of a dress from the 1890s, as far as I know. And the skirt panels, actually, I think it's the skirt panels, actually have the original shaping for the bodice, just turned down inside. It's because she was recycling it, she didn't necessarily feel she might not recycle it again. So she didn't cut the pattern pieces down, she just folded the bits, the extra bits inside. So the principal dress, the fabric of the dress, is from the 1890s. The lace flounces are probably off a wedding dress from about 1905. And the embroidery, machine done panels here, and the rosettes were modern. So you've got pretty old, and brand new. Make this whole thing put together. It is, as I say, likely the beginning of the war. It still has a conspicuous figure to it, but it's not as exaggerated as the others. Because as soon as the First World War starts, and it's actually a little bit before this, because they know the war's going to come, women have to be more comfortable because they have to do more physically. So the corsets are not done as tightly. One of the inspirations for fashion at the time is the Japanese kimono, which is attractive, high-waisted, so it buys into the concept of the empire waistline, but it's also comfortable. It does not exaggerate or exploit the figure, in fact, it hides it. And if you look at this little coat here, the dress too, for that matter, kimono sleeves, no seam here for the shoulder, and no seam there, as it would be in a kimono. It's all about square and rectangular pieces straight off the kimono, off the loom, and stitched together loosely, because when the kimonos were cleaned, they took the pieces apart and cleaned them separately and then restitched them. You don't do that with a fashionable garment or something that's sewn by machine, but if it's sewn by hand, it's not a big deal. And this coat, which is from Charles Stevens and Brothers, Chicago. Again, look at the sleeve. There is a seam there, but it's not real. It's implied by that piece of ribbon and rosettes. Or no, that is the seam, but the whole thing is meant to hang like a kimono, and the principal ornament is the vestigial bow on the obi. The hat is Bergeret style, so you're borrowing from different influences here. And in the 18th century, when women started to simplify their costume, even Marie Antoinette had a costume she wore so she could pretend to be a shepherdess. And she wore hats like this. And the idea was that the life of the shepherdess was divine because it was so simple and uncomplicated. Not like her tragic life at court with all the gossip and people mad at her because she apparently bought a diamond necklace that cost too much money and all that kind of stuff. So that's where that comes from. The hat is by Camille Roger, who was a French milliner and of the highest quality. You are privileged today because I haven't used this, I have never used that hat in a fashion show before, ever. And we don't use it because it is the, the finest quality there is, and it's unbelievably fragile. In fact, I insisted, I put it on Debbie's head, and we've already got the person assigned who's going to take it off and wrap it up, and then she leaves the stage. But it is silly and wonderful. I bought the hat from Mr. Watkins. Anybody who lived long enough in Vancouver to remember Watkins Antiques on Granville at about 7. Mr. Watkins came from England in 1935, and this is one of the things he brought with him. It was an odd thing for him to have because he sold porcelain and other ceramics and glass in his shop, which was about, not truly, but the sense was that it was about the size of this stage. And even in, I used to go into his shop when I was going to UBC, and I graduated in 1969, so you can do the math. And his shop, I walked like this because I knew I was going to break something. And he had cups and saucers then that were $400 a piece. It was just staggering, the things he had in there. And he just looked like somebody out of a diver, a dumpster diver, that kind of stuff. And so did she. She used to knit her own stockings on a heavy gray wool. Is any of the family here before I go? She wore horn-rimmed glasses, she had gray hair cut Dutch style, and no teeth. But the stuff they had was spectacular. And he sold me this hat and another one which is even more wonderful, and a paisley shawl from about 1810. Each piece was $25 a piece, and he sold them to me for the price he was going to charge when he brought them in 1935. And he sold them to me because he knew how much I wanted them, and I was going to school and had no money. So somewhere, he's got an antique shop in heaven now. So anyway, so it was perfect for today and for this outfit because it's silly, but it's wonderful. And it also exemplifies the attitude about women at the beginning of the war in particular, where they were to be portrayed as vulnerable. And that's how you get men into the military. Women who are sweet and precious and vulnerable and cannot defend themselves. And that's how you get young men fired up about being heroic and consequently patriotic at the same time. You're going to battle to protect them. At the end of the war, the women looked much more resourceful. Same thing happened during the Second World War. Thank you very much, David. So Mary Lou is wearing a dress here that I got out of the Canadiana Costume Society collection in Victoria. The Canadiana Costume Society started in 1973 with the ambition to found a museum of costume and textiles in Victoria. They did quite well for quite a long time, but they did run into financial problems eventually, and they had to disband. There is another branch of the same organization that looks after the costume collection and displays at Burnaby Village Museum, and they still are in operation there. they had, when they decided to disband, this is about 10 years ago now, they had quite a large collection, and the bulk of the very good things went to the Canadian Museum of Costume in Winnipeg. They sort of had some struggles themselves, so they don't have a physical building anymore. They just have storage, as we do, and then they have an outreach program. So the 18th century things went to them, and some very, very special garments. The other garments, sort of going down the list, the other garments, some went to the Provincial Museum in Victoria, some went to Craigdarroch Castle in Victoria, some went to Helmkin House and so on. They spread things out. And then they offered SMOC, some things as well, which we have upstairs. We got about 40 things from them. And then some of the other, one of the other groups that had received things couldn't keep their collection, so they gave us those things as well. So we have a fair number of them. There was, the last day I helped them, the things they couldn't find homes for, I helped them sell. Very, very foolish on their part, but good on my part, because I kept my commission in trade. You can always get money, but you can't always get more treasures, you know. There's always money somewhere out from the liquor store. There's somewhere. We thought in the past about doing fashion shows out from the liquor store. Passing extremely good now. But we've resisted so far. A couple of days before they were truly, they had to be out of their residence days. I heard one of them say, well, what about all this stuff? They had a separate, small, but a separate room for the things they thought were beyond hope. And this dress was one of those things. It was filthy dirty, and they thought it was not salvageable. So this was their disposable items. These were the things that were supposed to go to the dump. So I took the dress knowing how much of a challenge it would be to get it clean. So I took the collar off because it didn't need to be aggressively washed, and I washed the dress. And it's come up fine. I told you how to wash an antique piece of clothing. You use Orvis paste, which is an animal shampoo. You can get it at a veterinarian. It's very, very mild. You use a basin of some description. The kitchen sink is what I use for. And you fill the sink with tepid water and as little water as you think you're going to need to soak the garment, and you soak it in this soapy solution, but don't, use the palms of your hands, don't do this or anything like that. So you put about that much water in. Vivian Fro, who's our chief referee for such things, she says you put 2 fingers into the Orvis paste, which is a bit like shampoo, to the depth of the first knuckle. And that's how much soap you use, and you foam it all up. And I use a wire whisk to foam it all up. Then you put the garment in. Then you put a glass beside the sink, and you put that much whiskey in it. Then you wash the garment, and you rinse it 3 times. If it survives, you drink the whiskey to celebrate. If it doesn't survive, you drink the whiskey for consolation. It works every time. So when Mary Lou comes around, you'll notice there's this little open work section here around the skirt, the armhole, and down the skirt. That is drawn thread work. It's very, very simple, but if anybody's a hand worker, what they've done is they've cut the vertical threads at one end and pulled them out one at a time to create those bars. In the old days, they would have then embroidered in the needle and thread to create patterns of pinwheels or fan-shaped ornaments and everything else under the sun. But that's how that's done, and that's what proves to me that it was in fact a fairly expensive dress. It is silk. It's Georgette. Georgette is a lightweight, non-transparent silk. Crepe is really what it is. So that's what you see here, and that little collar is supposed to make it look girlish. And the hat is the equivalent of a bonnet. These hats, they wear them all the way through the 20s, but they're more popular in the early part of the 20s with a broad brim. And the brim is elliptical. It's narrowest at the back, broadest at the sides and the front. From 1917 and on, selected women in Canada could vote in federal elections. Before that time, and we're talking about international fashion as well, because in the States it sort of happens at the same time, and in Britain and in other European countries, except for Switzerland, this idea that's when things are changing for women and they are able to vote. When you have a physical voice, when you have a political voice, you don't have to depend on your physique for value. Before that time, it's a woman's figure that was so important. Once she has a voice, the figure disappears. That's exactly what you see here. They wanted to still be feminine, but instead of womanly before the war, then more youthful during the war, and finally girlish. She's supposed to look like she's can dress up in her mother's clothes because everything is too big. The waistline, which had been high, falls. Now, this dress for 1922 or 23 should be a bit longer. I thought when we did the fit, I thought it was longer, so I was looking at it in the confines of my living room. So it should really be down to almost the ankle. And then it does look too big. And the hat sinks low. Women are cutting their hair as a sign of modernity, but of emancipation as well. So the hat sinks low, and she tends to look like she's playing dress up. The shawl, sorry, I've forgotten where I got it. I take the tags off and then they get them back on. But the shawl is probably Chinese export wear. Usually they're done on silk fabrics. This is cotton net. So it's double-sided embroidery, so both sides are identical. And it's, I don't know what the flowers are. They might be roses, but they're a little bit more exotic than that to me. Shawls and things with fringes, beaded things that have weight to them, that would add to the verticality of the image, are really, really important in the 1920s, because you are emphasizing the vertical. 1900, it's all about curves. Now it's about straight lines. Action and reaction. Thank you very much, Meredith. As the skirts get shorter, the legs are conspicuously visible. So with the 1910 dress that Sheila was wearing, you might not have thought it, but the stockings were colored to match the dress. So you see the leg, but you don't see the skin. So it's a compromise which keeps the more moderate faction of society happy. You still have that depth of color all the way down to the ground. So it's not distasteful to the modest folk. Go ahead, the next one.
What would you stockings be?
The stockings at the time, the question was what the stockings would be made of. Conventionally, they would have been cotton lisle, or for more important occasions, they would have been silk. And they would have been absolutely machine knit. Handmade stockings would have been restricted to very rural people or in ethnic traditions. So a lot of times things like Hungarian costumes, they would have had hand-knit stockings, Polish and that sort of thing, would have made their own stockings out of cotton yarn. So it doesn't show conspicuously here, but Cindy is wearing stockings which are colored to match the dress. That same idea. This dress, I think this dress actually came from Canadiana as well. I'm not sure. And again, it was in that they're things that were so vulnerable that they didn't think that they would be useful. The dress is very much loose, hangs from the shoulders. We have gone absolutely from one extreme to the other here. They thought of these clothes as being intellectual, well, maybe not intellectual, but intelligent, because for the first time in living memory, the entire weight of the garment rests on the shoulders. There is no need to wear a corset or any kind of restrictive garment that is going to be unhealthy through an extended period of time. In 1900, girls would have started to wear some kind of foundation garment at about a year and a half. She would have worn a truly restricted corset by the time she was 11 or 12, and the idea would be that she would need to wear it when she was sleeping, because as she grew, they wanted to distort the rib cage. I always thought that was interesting because by the time she's grown up, the body shape is no longer fashionable. So she's stuck with a distorted rib cage when this is the look that they're going for. The body of the dress is lightweight silk, Georgette again, so very, very lightweight silk. It is pleated, finely pleated, so that it will emphasize the vertical line. The figure is recherché, great word. The French are responsible for all sorts of glamorous terms in the world of fashion, of course. Recherché means you gotta pay attention, you gotta look for it, you gotta hunt for it. So it's so ambiguous here that if a guy wants to check her out, he has to pay attention and see what happens when she moves. And again, it is about kinetic sculpture. Because the weight is in the beads, not in the fabric. That panel around the bottom is all beaded. It's glass. I get enough workout moving around the house lifting boxes of beaded dresses. Believe me, a box with 20 beaded dresses in it probably weighs 30 pounds. So it is, you don't think about it, you don't realize how it accumulates like that. Anyway, the thought here is that she should look like an Egyptian temple dancer. That's what they're getting going for. This is about 19, the opening cuts to 22, 23. This outfit here is probably about 1926. But that fascination with things Egyptian goes on forever and ever. It certainly starts in the 20s. Well, it doesn't start in the 20s. There's lots of references in other time periods as well, much earlier. But here, this very straight shift out of the ancient world. Not just Egyptian, but all the ancient societies of North Africa and the Middle East. This is a wedding dress that was worn by an English woman when she married a Canadian flyer in southern England in 1943. So, I just showed you a wedding dress from the Prairie, from 38, 5 years later. This is the development. It is an afternoon dress, same in fabric, wartime economy and practicality. Once again, it is a color. This is hugely popular during the Second World War. There were still white wedding dresses being worn, but many women felt it was unpatriotic to wear white wedding dresses because it was wasteful. When I worked at the Museum of Vancouver, on 3 different occasions that I can remember, women brought in their mother's wedding dress, which was the last white wedding dress in Vancouver. 3 of them. So I think what happened is the very smart vendor would keep them in the back. And then they'd check out the woman, and if they liked her, they'd bring her a nice one. And if they didn't like her, they'd bring out the ugliest one and say, this is the only one we've got left. Anyway. It is classic wartime fashion. The war starts in 39, ends in 45. Sentiment is typical of the early part of the war. You'll still see puff sleeves at the end of the war, but for the most part, for formal clothing, shoulder pads have replaced puff sleeves. Strength replaces sentiment. At the beginning of the war, as with the First World War, women are portrayed as weak and vulnerable, to stir the patriotic, heroic heart of young men. By the time you get into the highest part of the war, if that's the right word to use, what's happening is that women have become more resourceful, more independent, and more worthy of respect for their resources and capabilities. So shoulder pads make you look physically strong. They're psychologically reassuring, and they're aesthetically complementary because the bigger the shoulders, the smaller the waistline looks. Also, if you have broad shoulders and a tiny waistline, you have essentially a triangle, which makes you look vaguely manly. At least you have the strength of a man, implied, if not real. But also, if you cut a skirt in an A-line shape, you're actually creating this shape of the letter X. So the waistline looks smaller and smaller every step of the way. An A-line skirt gives you mobility without restrictions and without wastefulness. The dress is also cut on the grain of the fabric, not on the bias. The bias cut will cling. It's attractive, it's sexy and all that sort of stuff, but it's also inhibiting. You can't move properly because it's constantly binding you up one way or another. So this is the better compromise. During the Second World War, in Canada, the Wartime Prices and Trade Board dictated how much labor and yardage could go into the production of a factory-made garment. In Britain, they had CC 41 legislation, which did the same, and there were restrictions in almost every country associated with the war. And I do like to mention the ADEFA organization in fascist Germany. ADEFA was an anagram for a phrase in German that stood for, in translation, guaranteed to be made by Aryans. And this was part of the propaganda orchestrated to undermine confidence in the Jewish garment industry. My friend Klaus Janke collects fashionable clothing from Germany and Austria, and he is in the processes right now of organizing a loan of some of his garments to the Jewish Museum of Vienna. That exhibition will be opening on the 16th of May. Klaus and some of our people are going to go to the opening. Klaus has to go to install, of course. And he found out this last week that the Canadian ambassador in Vienna has agreed to pay for part of his expenses to get there. And the ambassador will be going to the opening. When I heard this, I was so proud of the Canadian government, I was just ready to burst, especially when you think what's going on south of the border. Not to get into it, but as they contract, we're expanding, and that is spectacular, so we're really proud of that. The hat is original to the dress. During the war, because of restrictions, generally speaking, if the hat is fancy, it's tiny. So that the amount of raw materials for such things could be spread evenly amongst the people who want it. If a hat is plain, it tends to be larger, and it's about function because it keeps the sun out of your eyes. So it's not necessarily that it's only function, it can still be snappy and ornamental, but that's slightly different issue. It's practicalities, but this is about ornament. The flowers are chrysanthemums and they're made out of leather. In Britain, the CC 41 legislation did control production of garments and shoes and handbags and all those kinds of things, but there was no rationing for hats. You still had to use your coupons to buy hats, but you could buy as many hats as you could, as you wanted to, because the British government thought it was so important for morale that women could buy hats if they wanted. Isn't that charming? The shoes, everyone thinks of platform shoes during the 40s, and that's true enough, but they actually tend to be more popular at the very end of the war and after the war. By the end of the war, they're experimenting with other raw materials because leather was at such a premium everywhere, but certainly in the continent. And that's when people like Ferragamo introduced cork and wooden soles in shoes and that kind of experimentation. But this kind of shoe was popular from the late 30s with the high vamp to it and a fairly high but practical heel. You see that from about 1937 through to about 1943-44. It will continue after that time, but the platform shoes start to take on a greater value. Seam stockings, of course. If you haven't got seam stockings, the eyebrow pencil down the back of it. So I have to mention it every time because if I don't, people think I don't know that. Okay, thank you, Sophie. The color was dusty rose. And the blue, the counterpart would have been Saxon blue. And those were, they came to be considered to be dowager, matronly colors eventually. Certainly when I was a kid in the early 60s, oh, my mother would say, oh, she's worn that old dusty blue dress again, or what have you. And it was meant to imply that she was 20 years out of date. We have the next outfit. Sophie, can you go make sure you get it right around towards the back? Now, we wanted to be frivolous, of course, for Valentine's Day, and we needed to have, we had a wedding dress, but pink, but I wanted red and white in here as well. So, Mary Lou's wearing a coat here that I got at the Sally Ann many years ago. I hardly ever get to use it because it's such an odd color, realistically. It's self-taffeta, it's been embroidered by hand, and then quilted as well. The quilting pattern is in bolts. People still do crafts a lot, but there was a time when crafting was considered very humble, domestic sort of pastime for women on farms and so on. And then every so often, through publications or change in technology or whatever, or the advent of free time, recreational time, there are examples of people creating things that are considered to be fairly high fashion, but as craft projects, and that's what this is here. Can I ask you to undo it for me? The dress, I bought this in December. I had shown you a couple of things for those who came to our last show. I'd shown you a brown dress from the 1920s that was mummy brown. I bought some things from a woman named Anne, I can't remember her last name at the moment. Anyway, she's an actor, and she put together a small collection of vintage clothing to use in theater. And this was one of the dresses that was in her collection. She had altered it, so it took me a while to get it back into its more or less original form, and otherwise I would have used it in the last fashion show. But it was more appropriate for us today anyway, because it is this bright red. It's a rayon crepe. It is Canadian. The only way you can tell, because so many of these don't have labels in them, it has a lightning zipper in it. On the back it says, made in Canada. So it makes me seem like a good detective, but all I can do is read. It's very handy. This is going to be somewhere from about 1943 or 44 through to about 1948. It's typical for the end of the war, but this style does not come to an end when the war ends. The shelf life of a piece of clothing tends to be about 6 years. That's flexible because of variations in fashionable taste and whatnot. But if you think of the life of a winter coat, I think you feel you can wear it about 6 years and then it's no longer fashionable. You want a new one. It also coincides with the time when it starts to show wear and tear. The fashionable form, as I say, is variable, and it does not change necessarily at the turn of the decade. In other shows, certainly in the 1920s, if we were just doing the 1920s, we can define 3 specific silhouettes for the 1920s. We talk about the 1940s. There's a look of sentiment in the early 40s, then physical strength. This has shoulder pads in it that are there. It has a natural waist. It is fitted closely to the body. The skirt is long, but it's slim, not full. Those are things that are appropriate to a wartime economy where you're trying to get the best value out of the products which are available. In other words, not being required by the military. There is beading on it here, this sequin decoration here, but it's done by machine, no handwork. This puffy business here is wasteful, but it's a minimal indulgence. It's just almost as if it's a scrap taken off the cutting room floor and let's put it somewhere. It's seen as a neoclassical form. It's supposed to look maybe like a sarong perhaps, but it's draped around and it adds an element of design, and it's asymmetrical, so that has its value as well. And the beadwork is actually asymmetrical, well, it still balances, and that's the important issue. The skirts are generally, by this time, they are so slim because of the restrictions, you have to have a slit in the side right there to allow you to walk in them. So there is a practical aspect to it, not just about aesthetics, but about practicality. The hat is wonderful. It's silly and everything I want it to be. And perhaps a bit stark for the red dress. It should have perhaps been a red hat or a gold one, but we're trying to capitalize on Halloween. I did it again. On Valentine's Day. I was told also when I was talking about the first dress, when I was trying to say 1907, apparently I said 27. So I apologize for that. I'm old. I don't drink enough anymore. All my friends are reforming me. It's getting to be very boring. I'm going to give you that. All right. Thank you very much, Mary Lou. Now, you'll notice that Mary Lou, she's wearing real shoes here for the period, and they have open toes. I've told some of you before, there's a Charlie Chan movie that was done during the war. Instead of him being helped by his #1 son, he's helped by his #1 daughter, because his son is in the military, in the American military. And she comes into the camera view at some point, and she has been shopping, and she says, I bought toeless shoes, a crownless hat, and a backless dress. And Charlie says to her, I hope the war ends soon so you can buy a complete garment again. And it is a joke, but at the same time, it has some interesting overtones to it. We have the next one, please. I bought this dress from the same woman. And I wanted something that was, again, sort of underlining the concept of sentiment and the idea of women as returning to the home base. Because during the war, so many women started to work outside the home, not that they hadn't before, but in a way that was remarkable. Because women were needed outside the home for war work, for taking on construction jobs, driving buses. I have a uniform that belonged to the very first woman to be a BC Hydro bus driver. It's not her first uniform because she wore it out. But during the Second World War, she started as a bus driver. I had her second uniform. Anyway, so once the war was over in 45, styles don't change very much. And in 1947, the big change comes with new look, and the hems go down. The wedding dress I showed you a moment ago, it just barely covered the knee. The war was over. The textile and garment industries are suddenly without their biggest client. The military is not buying uniforms or tents or tarpaulins or anything like that anymore. So the fashion industry, or the garment industry, is worried. And they have to create an artificial demand, as they did in the 1930s, by creating styles that can't be made out of an old dress. Because the wartime dresses didn't have enough fabric in them. The skirts get longer. The waistline stays where it is. The figure is womanly. Should have been slightly manly before because of the big broad shoulders. We still have shoulders there, but the shoulder pads are much smaller. And to create that width in the shoulders, we have that little pleat right there, which is called a Gibson tuck. Because you see that in Edwardian clothes as illustrated by Charles Dana Gibson, the American cartoonist. And that little Gibson tuck there gives you width, but without muscularity. So that exaggerates the smallness of the waist once again. And on the skirt, we have pockets on the hips to make the hips appear wider. Men have no hips, women have hips. And that's how you prove it. This is a womanly figure. It's getting away from the masculinity. The hats that we just saw from the wartime 40s were worn perched on the front of the head. Now they tend to be worn on the back of the head. And if you analyze that hat, it's a bonnet. So again, it looks sweet, maybe almost babyish, but it is putting her back into that category. If you've seen the movie Bus Stop, which is later, it's 1957 or whatever it is, in Bus Stop, Marilyn Monroe who's supposed to be an airhead gal. Fabulous movie, she's terrific in it. She wears a little gold lame bonnet with a chin strap. Now, you can't really mistake Marilyn Monroe for a baby. But she was somebody's baby. But anyway, there was this revival of sentiment. And I picked this dress because the print is salt and pepper shakers, coffee mills, all sorts of little kitchen ornaments and doodads. She's back in the kitchen. But it's good. It's good. And it's a great dress. And I don't think in any way the woman who had this made by a dressmaker, a really good sewer, put this dress together. All hand finishing her. She didn't feel she had to apologize for that. She was proud of it. All right, thanks very much. So, by the mid part of the 50s, and I really wanted to sort of exploit the femininity of the 50s as much as possible, I'm going to take the coat away from the dress is silk, almost tissue-like in its hand. It is from Madame Runge's here in Vancouver. Madame Runge, there were two Madames Runge. The first one was actually a woman from France. The second woman, I think she was French as well, but I think she was Canadian French. They were in business here, I think, on Granville for many, many years. Anybody know for sure where the shop was? 14 in the Granville? 11 in the Granville. Their reputation was spectacular. Even today, if somebody phones me up and they say, I have a dress of my mother's, and I say, oh, that's nice. And then they say, well, it was from Runge. And it's like, I'm close to a week in the knee. But the truth is, she really did sell quality clothing. She also actually, on occasion, would bring in European couture for specific customers. I have a wedding dress from 1937 that she brought to town from Molyneux in London. And which is doubly interesting because in the books on him they say he never made wedding dresses, and I have one, and it was due to Madame Runge. So this is, it could be as early as 1953, it could be as late as 1957 or thereabouts. Depends on the height of the woman wearing it because the hem length is where you can date these things. But it is about new look, it's about the exaggeration of femininity. You have to think of the movie stars of this period and this exaggeration. Tiny waistline, a very seriously developed figure in this sort of business. The neckline here is not padded or any of this sort of stuff or with shoulders, but it has shoulder caps to it, but that neckline is wide and open. And you have the same result. You get width through the shoulders, making the waistline look tinier than it is. And even what this is called a surplus bodice, when it wraps around like that, that sense of it binding like that, again makes that waistline look absolutely tiny. We didn't know what kind of a hat to use with this, and I was trying to pick up on the fuchsia color as much as possible, so we went for a small one, but it could be just as easily a very large one, and especially for a cocktail party though, a small one is much more discreet. Seam stocking still being worn, and the skirt full, but not like a tutu or a ballerina sort of thing. They wanted to show that fabric was available, that you could afford it. It was the exaggeration and whatnot of the skirt, but the whole concept of crinolines is still relatively modest until you get into the early 60s. And that's when they get to be really, really extreme, except in the movies. All right, thank you very much. The coat is from, Lydia of Montreal. It's part of the Canadian schmata trade. Most of the ready-to-wear clothing, especially good stuff, came out of Montreal or Toronto. And this would have been sold. This, Madame Runge might have had such a thing because it's beautiful fabric, but this would have been middle price. It'd be more like perhaps Sweet 16, if you're a French Canadian, gallards to the rest of us. Good quality, ready to wear clothing. I wanted to take it off because the pinks don't really match. But the pinks in the dress are all varied as well. So okay, you get it back on.
What's holding the skirt out?
There is a crinoline in the skirt that's built into it, and we've also got a crinoline inside it to give it some polish.
Is that a swing coat?
Yes, I would refer to it as a swing coat. A swing coat should have a full semicircular back to it. And I assume it means that when you move, it swings. Actually, okay, I heard that you were doing this backstage, so swing with the skirt.
Oh, yeah.
What a girl!
What a girl!
But you know, clothing is fun. You know, why not? I'm blushing, I can feel it. But it is fun, and it should be fun. You want to dress up. And it's silliness. It can have serious overtones. I mean, I've told you a couple of things. The Adafa thing, that's really serious stuff. But it also is fun. All right, thanks, Sarah. And if you don't believe that it's fun, okay. I don't know what I did with my little tip for this one. I've got a note on this one, the person I got it from. Oh, sorry about it. It's lost in the abyss. Anyway, I got this dress. The person isn't here. Anyway, a couple of years ago, I think. It's Canadian made. I forget the name of the designer, the company. It's Montreal or Toronto, I'm pretty sure. Maybe Winnipeg. There were big companies there. It's actually what would have been referred to in about 1966 as a cage dress. Or a tent dress, a tent dress. The cage dress would have been the same, only it was wide, open, sort of like a window pane, checked lace kind of thing over top. But this would have been a tent dress, so it has a sheath-style foundation inside, and then it has this loose overdress to it. 60s, the antithesis to the exaggeration of the 50s, all about hourglass figure, long skirt, you see shape, but you don't see skin. Now you don't see shape, but you see more skin because the skirts get shorter. And the legs becomes the design feature. There's always going to be something which is being exaggerated. The focus, the thing that makes it glamorous, the thing that's going to get you romance. Maybe. So as I said, with the 20s too, if you want to appear sexy, they have to pay attention to you. Because you can't really tell what your figure is like. As they were saying backstage, it's very forgiving. So if you like potatoes and beer, and who doesn't like, well, I don't like beer. I like potatoes, though. I got the proof, I got evidence. Anyways, the hat I got from the estate of Patricia Jennings, Pat Jennings. If any of you knew her, her daughter Deborah, gave me quite a bit of Pat's wardrobe. Pat was with the Vancouver Symphony Society for years, and she operated their thrift store on Fraser and 42nd. And when they went out of business, she gave me a whole bunch of stuff. And then about 10 years after Pat had died, Deborah gave me the rest of the real collection. But this was out of her own wardrobe. It was actually not worn with this, but it was a similar crochet dress in the same color. I have that as well, but this one was more appropriate for us today. So as I said, this is mid-60s, and Twiggy is the icon. Before this, it's Marilyn Monroe, Elizabeth Taylor, I'm trying to think of the other big models of the day. Jane Russell, well, Jane Russell's a photograph herself, pretty much. But in terms of who was the big model? She had dark red hair. It doesn't mean. No, a model, not an actor. It doesn't matter. But she was in vogue. She was one of the first models to be more important than the designer a lot of times. She'd be almost upset with that.
Grace Codrington works with Anna Winter now. She was the crazy red hair.
No, this was definitely
Susie.
Susie Parker.
Susie.
Yes, who said that? Good for you. But she was one of the first really important models to be a personality, not a model. There were some of the others, but mostly within the business. But she was definitely featured in magazines and whatnot as a person. So anyway, the hat, we also always think of the tribute we owe to Phyllis Diller. Or Bozo the Clown.
Or Barbara Cartland.
Or Barbara Cartland. There's an interesting trio right there. But it's fun. And that was so much about the 60s with the introduction of pop art and op art into fashion. And of course, Mary Quant was the woman who invents the miniskirt, as she's credited with that, and the invention of pantyhose and so on and so forth. So there were a lot of changes going on in the middle 60s, but certainly by the end of the 60s as well. The handbag is by Judith Lieber, New York. Okay, and cocktails are by the LCD. Thank you very much. Okay. Action and reaction. So in the mid-60s, you get mini skirts and the figure disappearing. By the end of the 60s into the 70s, that emphasis changes once again, and hemlines go down to midi length here, maxi length perhaps, or hot pants worn with a maxi length coat and whatnot, because the skirts got so short that they had to find new directions to move in, where length of skirt, short, or whatever, all these things combined and changed and looked at in a new way. So I'm going to take the coat away from you right away. The dress and the coat are both by Yolanta. Anybody lived in Vancouver in the 70s, you would have known Yolanta Tang. Yolanta had a shop in Gastown right beside Fox and Fluevog shoes. And Yolanta was, it's a Canadian story for sure. Yolanta was an immigrant from Poland, and her husband, Ken, was an immigrant from Hong Kong. And they met here. One of their daughters actually modeled for me 10 or 15 years ago at Roadie House. So we're going to be doing that again. Anyway, Yolanta, as many other designers were doing at the time, in the late 60s, early 70s, because of hippie things and about nostalgia and vintage clothing coming into popular use, started to make clothing in the style of the 1930s and 40s. So she used to come to see me periodically, but not as an exclusive inspiration. But she would go through my clothes from the 30s and do knockoffs or variations. She'd look at a hem or a sleeve or whatever, and then do her version of it. Most of her clothing was done out of velour or out of polyester or rayon jerseys. And a lot of times she used the same jerseys as lining materials. Not as a good choice as far as I'm concerned, because you put a jersey print dress inside a coat like that with a different print. Not happy. However, what we have here is the silhouette of the 1930s. Waistline at its natural level. The garment is meant to cling, whereas in the 60s, a lot of the garments stand away from the body, they hang loose. Also, we have an A-line skirt, as we did in the 30s and 40s, and it's longer. Can't make this dress out of one from the middle 60s. Again, there's no fabric. The coat doesn't match, of course, but we did our best to try and keep within the Valentine's theme. It is rare to get anything from her that does match, because her fabrics were bull tails. There used to be several outlets in the city that would get velour bull tails from factories in Winnipeg or wherever else, and they throw them out onto a big table about the size of a pool table, and there'd be 10 of these tables in the room, and the local sewers would just go frenzied. It was weird. I didn't sew, but I'd go to watch. So that's why getting something that really matches is unusual. The coat is supposed to look sort of 30s, late 30s, so we have an A-line shape to it again. And I'll just slip this back on. Just to make the point, because if I find them anymore, and I haven't in a long while, I find them at the thrift stores in bathrobes. People always think they're dressing gowns, but they're actually not. They're fall coats. And they would have been worn with heavy boots or platform shoes, and we actually built the whole outfit around the shoes because they are platforms, they're English. I'm sorry, the company name is something like Hatfield or whatever. Anyway, on the vamp is a suede set of lips. So there's a big kiss on your toe right there. So that was the basis for putting this together as a Valentine's Day outfit. Okay, Sheila, thank you very much. But there are more elements to this to make a point, a political point. I am in my way a politician, but I never want to run for public office. It's a caftan. One of the things that many, many women are grateful for the hippie movement, for creating such a thing. And it is feminine and girly and all that kind of stuff, but it's also remarkably emancipated. Because you don't need to worry about your figure. You don't need to worry about much of anything because it is ornamental, but it is comfortable. And this is part of the political change for women in the late 60s, the early 70s. It also has ethnic overtones, which was an important issue in the late 60s, the early 70s. The Americans were dealing with the war in Vietnam. They were dealing with racism and all sorts of really nasty, nasty things. And not that those things are no longer with us, I'm afraid, but those are things that the hippie movement was questioning, and they were trying to change things. The kaftan here, which is a North African garment or a Turkish garment, is actually made out of a very inexpensive sari. And the gold, the glittery gold, is plastic lurex or what have you. So those are the fashionable things. It belonged to a woman named Helen Masalem. If you remember Masalem Motors, okay, that was Helen's family. They were Lebanese refugees to Canada in the 1920s. Masalem is an Anglification, whatever, of the word Muslim. They became very responsible, successful Canadians. And Helen won 3 degrees of the Order of Canada, and in one of those presentations she wore this dress. She was a nurse in her training, and she won those awards for her work with healthcare for women connected to the United Nations. So draw your own conclusions from that, okay? Yes. And as far as I know, I have 2 of the 3 outfits that she wore when she got those awards. She also got awards from the St. John's Ambulance people, and on and on and on. So there you go. All right, thank you very much. Now, I dug out the photograph this morning of her wearing this dress because I was looking for more information. It wasn't there. But she wasn't quite as theatrical as we portrayed it here. We used this fancy wig because I wanted to talk about the 70s a bit too, and there was a fascination for Edwardian revival, and that's what this wig is supposed to be. I bought that from a garage sale at one of the funeral homes here in Vancouver. I was driving, I don't want to name the funeral home because I don't want to have anybody embarrassed, but I was driving down one of the main streets in town, and there was a sign up. The business was moving to a new location. And there was a sign out front and it said, garage sale. How often do you get to go to a garage sale at a funeral home? So of course the brakes screeched. I went in and the sale was just flood over. But one of the morticians was a fellow who performed in drag in the clubs downtown. And that was one of his picks. I'm sorry, Sharia, what did you have to say? Yes, no, Shakri was saying that the Masalans were Christian, not Muslim. But when I got it from her great niece, I said, Masalan, where is that from? And she said, well, in the old days, it meant Muslim. But it might have meant, to the Canadians, it might have meant that they were from a Muslim country. But I have friends that were Christian Jews. That's how the Nazis came. And then they lost the term Christian because the Nazis didn't believe it. But the truth is you are what you claim to be, or whatever. But as Shakria said, the Masalans were members of Parliament, and so on and so forth. Their contribution as immigrants, regardless, was wonderful. And my people from Ireland, what I got from my ancestry, as far as I can see, is the gift of the gab. But everyone contributes in their own way. And you must look at the bigger picture. There are two kinds of people in the world, good guys and bad guys. And even there's gradations. Because a lot of people, I've learned, a lot of people can be wonderful their whole life through and then do something really, really stupid. And other people can be selfish and horrible, and suddenly they do something magnificent. Scrooge! There's the best example. Everybody knows that. My father was a preacher, can't you tell? Hallelujah. Speaking of sentiment and so on. The 1980s, I said it all had to be sugary sweet. I have a dental appointment tomorrow. And I'm going to need it. So it's not Laura Ashley. I don't know who it is, but yes, it is very much like Laura Ashley. But it is this, it's from the mid-80s. I got it from, I think I got that, I have 2 or 3 of them, but I think I got this from,
You made it? Is it mine?
yes, it is actually. Come to think of it. What's your last name, Debbie?
Pasco.
Debbie Pasco. Right there. You're right.
I made it.
You made it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's why there's no label in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It has
You
a
can't have it back.
I can't fit it anymore anyhow. But to make it see, because I have a small waist and very small shoulders, so I often exaggerated the shoulders on my dress for that very reason. And it has little like C-shaped additions and
Yeah,
things
inside there,
to
there's some
make it
stiffness.
stick out more.
Yeah.
And it's got a crinoline attached.
I got another one, because I said I had 3 of these prints. I have another one that I got from Martha Lality, whose mother was Hendrickson. Forget her first name, Nomi Hendrickson, who was the president of the University Women's Club here in about 15, 20 years ago, I think. So, and I mentioned that because I got the shoes from her. So the shoes are meant to be worn with one of these chintz prints here, and lace stockings, and it's this combination of sentiment and Edwardian and sugar, 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 and it works.
And last but not least, when I made it, the chintz hadn't really started here yet, so I
Right,
bought the
I remember you
fabric
telling
in
me.
the upholstery department.
And chintz is wonderful. It is a classic. The hat, the hat I got from Vicky Gobbler, the woman who I said I bought her mother's collection, and that was one of the few modern things that her mom had that I really, really liked. Millinery, really hasn't been all that important in the last 25 years or so. Princess Diana, there were consequences of her having to be in formal occasions, and every so often there's a royal wedding, so they'll do another version of whatnot. But actually, to find them as collectibles is a bit difficult, and this one is perfect for this dress. I hope that's okay. It is. Okay. All right. Thanks very much, Virginia.